Okay, so welcome again to a fire committee podcast. And this month we're focusing in the finance sector. So we've got our finance people here today who are going to kind of lead the conversation. And I'm just going to open it up. And why don't we just kind of talk about, first of all, what are you hearing? What's going on in the finance sector?
Hamilton.
So the first topic we wanted to discuss was consumer credit card debt hitting 1.3 trillion. That is just aggregate outstanding debt, right? It doesn't illustrate how impactful it is because along with that, the APR for those credit cards is in the high 20s as well. So it's not just the outstanding debt, but the payments are larger due to balances along with those rates that they are having to be charged. So it's very detrimental to those families and individuals that are just trying to skate by. It's the highest in recorded history, and there's really, with rates staying this high, there's no relief in sight.
Is there also increased default rates?
I'm sure those go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I don't know the numbers there, but I'm sure they're hand in hand.
Yes, there is. I can tell you from our side of things, we're seeing that tick up. So,
and we discussed, I think, in the past that on the mortgage side, on the home ownership, home equity side, that I think that we'll be seeing continually more and more people accessing their equity in their home since they've had appreciation at home to consolidate that, because that could make a big relief. So that could help, on one hand, obviously that could help their monthly budget, can help come straight people back out. But adding debt to the mortgage. And so then we'll be looking at people that have a lot of people that have real low first mortgage rate and then a higher home equity loan, second mortgage rate. So then what that does, I think, even more down the road is then it might think about combine, okay, wait a minute. If they have stress again on their finances, refinancing those two back together, going back to 30 years or something. So it's interesting because it seems like it's kind of a cycle, but so I can't imagine people not like, hey, my house just increased and I'm paying taxes on it. I'm going to take advantage of it. And I'm going to knock these high interest credit cards and this $1,000 in monthly payments to a $250 payment on a home equity loan.
So here's a question, and I don't know if you guys know the answer to this, but what's the reason for the huge uptick in consumer credit card debt? Is it because people are buying 85,000-inch plasma TVs, or is it because they're just trying to buy groceries and gasoline for their cars?
Right. Well, so inflation, right? Yeah. As things cost more, naturally you can buy the same exact things, but your credit card balance is going to go higher. But so I've never tied the two together, but what Brent was saying makes complete sense. We're seeing prices go up. That includes real estate, right? So your credit card debt is going to be increasing, but then the value of your home is also increasing, and you can tap into that equity and go from 28% down to 8% or whatever the home equity HELOC rates are. That makes sense for why we're seeing such a volume pickup in home equity product demand.
I think one thing is also with the mindset of people. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you may not be bringing enough income, and with the inflation, I think they go to the credit cards for not only just things of wants, but also things that they do need for necessities, and not realizing the interest rates on the credit cards. And the amount of time you purchase and the amount of time you pay it off. You can be paying off credit cards for a long time. That's why it's very important to understand the compound interest, the rule of 72, how long it's going to take you to pay off those credit cards.
Mm-hmm. And since we might be talking to an audience of those that are in this situation, there's a lot more credit card products out there that have 0% interest APRs, and it could be up to 18 months, 12 to 18 months. And so I would advise isn't the word, but I would tell you to look into those, because if you can, I know there's gonna be a transfer fee, and it might be 4%, which could hurt immediately or initially, but in the long run, you would save a ton of interest if you're able to take down that credit card debt in the allotted time.
Although when the intro rate
Expires.
resets, yeah, what does it go to?
You're paying.
Again,
Yeah,
You'll be paying what you were paying with the last
Yeah.
credit card,
Yeah.
so that's why it's important to prioritize taking that down in the amount of time that you've got.
Well, the elephant in the room, I think, going back to Dave Ramsey's principles, which I subscribe to, is at some point you do have to rein in spending. And at some point when inflation goes up and your income is not matching that, which wage growth has not matched that in the last 3 years, you have to take a hard look in the mirror sometimes and see what you can cut. And the debt snowball works. You make a great point, Brent, about consolidating those debts, but taking a step back as a financial advisor, people think the majority of my work is investments. Do I buy Google or Apple? And it's really more complicated than that. Specifically with markets at all-time highs, we can really help with those conversations, right? Partnering with the home lending advisor to decide what debts does it make sense to consolidate? How much are we spending? I'm not gonna sit down and do a budget per se with a client, but we can lead them to those tools that help them balance the budget. There's a difference between a 9% HELOC, home equity line of credit, and a 29% revolving credit card debt. And that's a big spread. So it's a great call out.
So let me ask you this question then, because this kind of ties into what you were saying. Wage growth hasn't matched the rate of inflation. And yet we're seeing the news that employment is higher, much higher than expected. So what's the mismatch between the high employment and the wage growth being, I guess, I don't know if it's stagnant. I don't know if that's the right word, but if it's not growing at the same rate as inflation, what's the disconnect between, high employment, but yet wages are not going up?
That's $1 million question. Yeah. For me, part of the answer is corporate profits. They're balancing a sheet as well. I mean, corporate earnings at all-time highs. And so part of it comes back to corporate greed for me. They're not doling out the wage increases to keep up with inflation. So is inflation corporations' fault? Not necessarily, but they can do something to kind of offset it. That's my thought.
And I think that's why we saw last week when the Fed met that they kept rates stagnant, because of that. It was a huge curveball seeing that employment rate. So again, $1 million question. we don't know that.
Yeah.
But I think even historically, going beyond these 3 years, which we all know we've seen hyperinflation. In the last 18 months, we've seen some disinflation, not de-inflation, unfortunately. But as it relates to the last 40 years, I saw something online the other day that showed the median household income versus the average home price in each decade. It wasn't just the good old era of the 50s or 60s, but even looking back to the 80s and 90s versus what it is today. A dual income household would have to make $173,000, which, by the way, is about double what it actually is, in order for that ratio to be at 2.5%, which is, 2.5x, which is what it's been literally for the last 60 years, give or take in each decade. But that was eye-popping to me. I knew that there was a disparity there, but I didn't realize that we were so far off. Because the average American household dual income is not making 173K. It's more closer to 85K, which is nowhere near what you need. Like we mentioned earlier offline, about the 30% of renters' income going to rental. I mean, and that's sticky inflation. Even though we've seen prints that have come down over 18 months consecutively, the administration wants to hang their hat on that, rightfully so. But rent, which is 30% of people's balance sheets, what landlord do you know that's going to decrease someone's rent? Mm-hmm. It's just simply about not increasing it as fast as it did last 6 months, last 12 months.
And I can tell you on that front that landlords, I mean, there's a lot of talk about, property taxes are going down a little bit because of some of the recent laws that have been passed. But what I think people fail to realize is that landlords' expenses are not just the property taxes, but it's also the insurance. That's a huge component of it. And of course, repairs and upgrades and things like that. So the price of materials and the price of insurance is both still going up. So I know that factors into it as well.
Well, and the property tax piece of it is, it's a homestead relief that was just passed, and so
Yeah, that's true.
a lot of renters are like, well, property tax relief just got passed in my land, but what they're not processing is it's a homestead. So because the landlord does not live there and doesn't homestead it, they don't get the relief that a regular homeowner does. So their expenses are not going down because of the property tax relief that was passed.
It's a great call out.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting last Monday and I found this interesting. So downtown Mansfield, there's a lot of big things coming, right? So there's reinvigoration into the downtown Mansfield area. There was a local business owner who rents down here. And whenever there was the Smith Street right behind us, expansion, I'll say, was announced, their rent went up, due to that information after their lease had expired. But we can see that there's not even been ground broken for the Smith Street expansion at this point. And so while it would be beneficial, additional feet on the ground, walking past your shop, there's a long lag time because we're still probably 18 months out at minimum before there's any revenues recognized from that. Well, that was 2 years ago. And then now there's then the other announcement of where the fire station and the lot, there's going to be mixed use with both commercial and multifamily there. Again, that's going to be a driver for economic growth, hopefully, but potentially that's why it's going through city, right? And so we will likely, or not we, small business owners in the area will likely see their rents increase due to that, but they're going to have to be able to survive that lag time between announcement, rent increase, and then finally construction complete and seeing their revenues increase. So I'd never thought about it like that. I did not know announcements making that large of an impact in the rental space, but it was kind of eye-opening.
Well, we might, in the long run, see a turnover in what types of businesses are down here, because if you're a CPA or you're a doctor or you're whatever who's renting this space, the traffic, the foot traffic doesn't necessarily, I mean, yes, your name's on the door, but you know, someone gonna pick up the phone to call their CPA while they're walking through downtown Mansfield.
Right, they're walking on a Friday afternoon or evening, and the last thing they're gonna go into is the CPA's office. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I got a question I'll throw out to the group, with regards to adding value to, anyone out there with high interest rates. A lot of folks feel like they're paralyzed with their 3% mortgage on their house. So like, I can't move because we're in such a good mortgage rate, even though maybe our income, we're lucky enough that it's outgrown our house, or maybe our family's grown. So has anyone explored assumable mortgages? The topic that I think is not discussed enough. I know it's not eligible with VA loans, but other loans I've heard it is eligible for. When you buy the house, you're able to assume that mortgage. So I don't know if anyone has any experience with that in the group.
I haven't done any yet. Lee, have you done?
I haven't personally done one, but I can't remember if I heard this from somebody I talked to or I just read this the other day, but there was a story where a family bought a house, and I think it was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area somewhere, and they were going to assume a 3 or 3.25% mortgage. And it took months because of the processing with the mortgage servicer. And so it seems that might be the downfall to that plan. Although if you're somebody who's having to move for whatever reason, but you have flexibility, it might work out okay for you. But on the other hand, if you're somebody who's moving, maybe because the job is moving you or something like that, and you found this house you want to get into, and you may not be able to do that if you've got to move sooner than what it might take for the servicer to actually process the assumption of that loan. So that seems like that might be one of the, downsides to it. I don't know, Brent, have you dealt with that at all?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, the other challenge piece of that is if you're assuming a mortgage, obviously you're assuming what's left on the note. So you've got to have a big giant
That's
amount
true.
of cash to make up the
The equity.
equity that has already been paid off or that has appreciated. So, you know, you paid $275,000 for a house 5 years ago at 3.2 interest or whatever, and now it's worth $475,000. So, and you've paid it 5 years, anyway, you've got this big giant sum that you have to come up with to make up for that equity that's not rolled into the financing already.
And that's what I was gonna say too. That's the big piece of it. So it's like, seems like it's a small, you know, a small population or people that could actually
Mhm.
can
I
work
mean, I
out
guess-
for. And I've seen VA, you're saying VA is not, most of the ones I've seen are VA that are assumable.
Maybe I have it flipped. It's not
Yeah.
my area of expertise.
Yeah. And so other than VA, I haven't really seen many
Yeah.
loans that I've closed that are assumable, you know, so, and I don't know if that's just a matter of, you know, what goes into that, you know, not wanting to, you know, hey, forcing somebody to have to finance at higher rates down the road or whatever the current market rates are, but,
I would just think if I'm a realtor and my client has a 2.5%, 15-year, 30-year, whatever,
Mhm.
and the neighbor has, you know, a 6-year, or let's say, or not 6-year, 6%, or let's say that my loan is assumable for whatever qualifications that I have on the loan versus my neighbor, same house, like same price. If I'm a realtor, I'm like shouting that from the rooftops that, you know, in certain scenarios, you could potentially assume the mortgage. But you mentioned that, you know, having to come to the table with a lot of cash, which is understandable. Pretty much first-time home buyers are going to be pretty much priced out of that. However, think about someone who's had a house since 2017 that has seen that similar level of appreciation. If going to have hopefully a couple $100,000 booked up in equity that they could potentially shift over upon closing, I would think. So,
If it's somebody that, yeah, that's the point. If it's somebody that has an existing property,
They have an
they might be
existing
able to do
3%
it.
and they're looking for, and like, it's,
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's not something we should be attempting to do for our clients, but it also, it's kind of it's almost a unicorn scenario.
that's what I was gonna say. My conversations with my buyers has been, you know, look, this is a possibility, but there are so many other things that these buyers are concerned about, and usually we leave it at such that, okay, if we bump into it, fine, we'll explore it, but we're not gonna go out looking for something assumable because of the unicorn, what you just said, Stephanie.
interesting.
Well, and I think the other thing people forget, and I know we're not supposed to be real estate focused today necessarily, but the market is not, you know, there's this kind of misconception that we're in a terrible real estate market right now, and that's just not exactly the case. I mean, I listed one this weekend that I had multiple offers on. So
Yeah.
I also have 2 listings that have been sitting there for 90 days. So there's different scenarios in different areas. When people ask me, how's the market? I said, it depends on where your house is, you know, or what your price point, it depends on so many different things. But when you're looking for assumables or you're trying to find something specific like that, we're not exactly in a market where you can, you know, buyers get to make all the decisions right now. There are still some scenarios where sellers are in charge, if that makes sense.
Isn't that interesting? The public perception of the market, stock market, same way. Half my clients I talk to, even though we literally hit 10 all-time highs this year, feel like, yeah, well, you know, maybe one day this market will turn around. I'm like, yeah, the day was like 15 months ago. But we're up 39%, by the way, from the October 2022 lows. 39% on the S&P. The NASDAQ is up even way more than that. So, all the more important for a financial advisor.
Are you finding, now I read the other day something about, you know, there's still a lot of cash on the sidelines. A lot of investors still have a significant amount of their funds in money market funds. Are you seeing that? And are you seeing any of it move back into stocks and bonds and other investments?
It's a great question. So, you know, they typically, the typical investor is investing now, right? Not when they really should have been in October of 22. No one could have called the bottom, but a lot of folks like to get in when they kind of start seeing the headlines that the S&P has hit an all-time high, right? So yes, we see a ton of cash out there. And frankly, I don't blame clients to an extent when you're getting 5.25% on your cash. By the way, if you have money in a savings account, get it out of the savings account. get it into a money market, as you mentioned. It's not too late. Rates will be dropping, but even if they drop to 4.5 or 4, that's still so much more profitable for you. Speaking of trying to kind of cut into that consumer debt we're seeing, I see it all the time. Clients in their 40s and 50s that have 6 digits in a savings account earning 0.01%. By the way, the big banks aren't going to change that. Small banks may, and you may find a CD or some type of high yield savings. But in my opinion, the money market risk is minimal. It's not no risk as we saw in 08, 09, but it's very low. And the reward currently is 5.25%, 5.5%, and it's fully liquid. So you bring up a good point, and I, frankly, can't blame my clients for keeping a good chunk in not cash, but cash equivalents or money market, as we call them.
Well, and isn't there an opportunity too, because you want to start talking about opportunities, when it does start to correct, when things begin to bottom out, there's an opportunity to go in now and buy.
Absolutely.
To buy property, to buy whatever, where, as far as that's where the real advantage is, and the real opportunity is to take that, if you've got cash, to pull it aside in some way so that you're ready when it bottoms to go in and scoop up.
Right.
Because that's how the wealthy stay wealthy.
So can I tie this back to the original conversation about the consumer credit card trouble? If there's all this cash on the sidelines, why isn't it going to pay off the credit card debt? Or is
Because
it
the
that
people who have the cash don't have the debt.
that's what I was about to ask? Is it that the people with the cash are not the ones with the consumer credit card?
Seems to be widening even further.
Yeah.
Yes, there you go.
So we know that. I mean, is there some kind of statistic or number that says, okay, the people with this $1.3 trillion credit card debt they have no investments of any kind? Is that?
Well, the data is out there. The firm I work for has all of that data, and the interesting part about it is, it's due to consumer privacy laws. It's a lot of times aggregated and provided to us in bite-sized pieces. But what I will say is that, and this is not completely uncommon, that you have clients with cash with credit card balances, which probably to the 8 of us here in the room seems nonsensical. But a lot of clients they don't understand what they're paying, and they don't understand why they're paying it. And they just get used to that monthly debit of the minimum payment of $280 or $450 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that $80K or $150K in cash makes them feel good. So, it's not unheard of. Again, I can only speak to my sample size of clients that I can see their balance sheets intimately, but I'm sure the data is out there, whether it's publicly available, who knows, but
They always say to keep a rainy day fund, right? Well,
Yeah.
that's variable. That one person's rainy day fund is different from another person. So if they're not going to be comfortable unless they have 100K cash, they're still going to be spending they're going to carry a balance on the credit card until they're really secure in what they think that number is.
absolutely.
So I guess then that begs the question, should we even be concerned about this 1.3 trillion? Does it really even matter?
Absolutely. I think the strength of the consumer goes, it's similar to inflation, obviously similar to the Fed funds rate. The fingers spread out into all areas of the economy, including employment, including hiring. We're already seeing layoffs start. Our base case is that there's not going to be a recession in 24, whereas we felt the opposite in 23, pretty much like everyone else on the street. And we got that wrong, thankfully. But one thing to keep in mind is, as you are a consumer, shifting gears a bit, is that recessions are normal. Recessions are a normal part of the economic cycle. Mm-hmm. It's not an economic anomaly for there to be a recession. Making sure you're prepared for that recession as a consumer is key. Like you mentioned, having the emergency fund. We recommend 6 to 9 months of expenses set aside in cash or cash equivalents. But unfortunately, some clients don't have that, or some Americans don't have that luxury. So it goes back to spending. And there's two sides of that equation. If you can't change your income typically, unless you're making a wholesale change to your career normally, but you can absolutely change your expenses. So I just encourage folks to take a strong look. There's an app out there called Every Dollar, which is free. It's a Dave Ramsey app, but it's an app that allows you to track every dollar that you spend. That's why it's called Every Dollar. my wife and I use it for many, many years. And anyway, so it's a way where you can really get a wrangle on your finances, because you're not gonna be able to cut spending unless you know where it goes.
And that's, we just talked about everybody having a different definition of rainy day fund. Well, I'd always heard 3 to 6 month savings, and then so we're here in 6 to 9 months, but then also we've learned that over the last 2 years, your monthly expenditures gone up, whatever it might be, 11%, 8%, or what have you. The calculation completely just changed, right?
Yeah.
So your months change depending on who you ask, and then also the amount per month also changing. So
one note on that too is just keep in mind why the rainy day fund is there. It's for a rainy day when you lose your main source of income. So if you're employed and you've been there for 30 years, and let's say you're a tenured professor, right? Pretty safe job. Maybe you could get by with 3 months of expenses. But, or let's say you're on fixed income where you've got a pension that's insured by the PBGC and you've got Social Security. That's a pretty secure form of income. So, obviously being able to pull from savings for replacing the AC unit for 10 grand, which seems like in Texas, we do that way too often.
Mm-hmm.
Those type of things, and they tend to come in threes. You need new tires on the truck and you need a new AC unit, and, son or daughter needs to borrow a couple grand. So it's not just if you specifically lose your income, but I always tell clients to look at how secure you feel in your current income. And that would help me customize how much I think you need to have in cash.
You always tell clients, it's not a matter of if an emergency is going to happen, it's going to be when.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, thoughts from the group on the national debt. This has been something that has been growing for ever since, frankly, the 90s when we had a surplus, and then obviously defense spending, war, rightfully so, had ballooned in the early 2000s. But I hear that a lot from clients, that the national debt is going to get us in trouble. We owe China our shirt on our back, and 17 trillion or 24 trillion. No, it's 27. No, it's 31. So what are y'all's thoughts on the national debt and how that's going to affect the economy, short, intermediate, long term?
I don't have the answer, but money is finite, right? There's X amount for the globe, and I've always heard that about the national debt. And China's in a pretty poor financial state for what they've been in right now. Somebody's winning, and I just can't pinpoint who those someones are. The European Union, not in a strong financial position historically either. So I guess I'm not going to worry about the national debt until we see somebody supersede us, and it's blatant and obvious.
Well, you make a good point about the money source. And I guess my thought there was that the money source for the US is not finite, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, that's how we got ourselves, because we just continue to issue new debt to finance stimulus or to finance government programs. So at some point, I mean, obviously, if we're running a household like that and we're in our debt service, right? What's the 10-year paying? 4.15. If we're issuing new debt at 4%, we're paying 4% on those billions and trillions of dollars. That's why I think it's really come into it's come into public purview more with interest rates being higher, simply because the debt service payments that the federal government is paying are in the billions.
It's not sustainable. And who do we owe the money to?
Well, we owe it to bondholders, and China does own a good bit of that debt, as do other foreign.
And China's in trouble. Well, they at some point go, God, we need some money. We need our money back.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Is those, they call it the risk-free rate for a reason. So they're able to kind of cash those bonds in. So China's got, I think, in my opinion, I just was reading about it earlier in the week, their growth rate or lack thereof is really going to be an issue, similar to what Japan was at 10 to 15 years ago. They don't have enough 30 and 40-year-olds, call them millennials here in America. They don't have enough millennials currently to sustain their workforce, which is going to be an interesting problem for businesses here in America that rely on Chinese components. So right
Which
now,
is everything.
which is a good chunk, right? So, and semiconductors really get a lot of the pub on this, that we need Intel to produce more locally and rely less on Taiwan semiconductor, but it's not all about that. And obviously that's why our interest in Taiwan, we want to be humanitarian about it. It's not, it's all about Taiwan semiconductor, in my opinion. So we do need to produce more of those locally here in the US, but I think China, as far as the concern with who owns the debt, I think is a bit overblown, in my opinion.
Well, because they're actually the largest, I mean, who's the one, China's not the largest.
It's Germany,
Holder.
right?
They're not the largest holder.
No,
they're,
it's our own social security, trust, I think it's the Social Security Trust Fund is,
Right.
is actually the largest holder of our public debt. But I mean, having said that, China is a large holder, but I always go back to this. In the eighties, I remember in the eighties, everybody was worried about Japan owning our debt. And they did. Japan was a much larger holder of our debt in the eighties. And, you know, that was kind of the fear then, was Japan's going to take us over and da. I mean, it never really happened. Having said that, I mean, I agree. I think
We were operating at a surplus then too, right? So,
and also Japan
well,
diplomatically was an ally,
whereas China's a little bit more.
the waning relations with China since 2018 have been well documented, but
I think part of this is, you know, I think I'm going to speak from a public perspective, because I think most people hear these numbers, you know, 18 trillion, 31 trillion, who cares? I mean, it just seems like it's just a number. I mean, at that point, it's just I don't think
Because it's not affecting them personally.
it
like
it
monopoly.
might be affecting them a little bit, but it's like monopoly money. It's like they don't have, I don't think
Doesn't
people
mean
have, it doesn't mean anything.
How
People don't have
often
the
is that?
concept. Yeah,
Where's the consequence? There hasn't been one.
yeah. And I mean, Andrew, you said this a while ago, I mean, or somebody said this, I mean, we're still kind of the top dog, I mean, in the world. The United States is, the dollar is still the sort of de facto currency of the
For a
planet.
short time.
I
You've
mean,
got BRICS trying to.
you got BRICS trying to produce, or they already have produced it, but whether it actually
catches on.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, at some point, does the house of cards come crumbling down? You and I, Laura, we've talked about this a bunch. In my opinion, on this whole thing, it's going to work for as long as we collectively believe it works. And the day that collectively we go, this is not right, then it collapses. Because the reality is, it is just a house of cards. The whole system, the whole
And
fiat
the
money
sad part
system
is
only
it
works
is
because
now tied globally.
Yeah.
So.
Because it's not just the
major
US.
It's
Yeah.
not just the US.
But you have like, what was it the other day I read? Was it Argentina's inflation rate was like, I don't know, 1,200% or something. This is like last week or something. I mean, you do have countries where, the inflation rate just goes through the roof because they printed all this money, but their currency is not the currency of the planet. So, clearly the principle exists where, when you print too much, eventually it comes back to haunt you. I think the question is, at what point does that happen for the US dollar and the United States economy? And I don't know the answer to that either.
well, looking back, I'll pose a question to the group. Does anyone know what nation has the lowest inflation among the G7 nations? It's interesting.
I don't.
Interesting point. Anyone want to take a guess?
I don't.
United States of America.
There you
It's
go.
true. So if we can't, I know you're not comparing us to Argentina, but that's kind of a base case. Not base case is the wrong word, kind of a exception, not the rule, but
That's kind of like what I was saying. It feels like we're losing, but somebody's got to be winning. And I can't pinpoint it. If our inflation rate's the lowest of the G7s, then are we really losing?
and that may be by 0.1%.
Sure.
But that's a stat that I had to fact check last week, and it's true. Again, I don't know where everyone ranks, but I found it pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
And again, inflation is part of the problem. But again, I can't reiterate enough that control your controllables. You cannot control how much Kroger is going to charge you for eggs.
Yeah,
technically you can't control how many eggs you're gonna eat, right? I mean, you got a family of 4, you gotta eat, right? But you can absolutely control, do you go to Starbucks and buy coffee, or do you brew it at your house? Do you drink a 32-ounce cup or a 20-ounce cup, Sometimes you brew a 32-ounce cup and then pour it in the sink, and,
I think we just went
I think,
to the house.
sorry, it's,
yeah, was he looking over there?
No
I will flash.
or judgment at all.
Let me ask, if we bring this back to the average household. So with all this, with the financial education, it's not being taught in school. The banks are not teaching them. Credit card companies are definitely not teaching.
sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna jump in
Go
there.
ahead.
I'm gonna jump in there. Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. I'll let you finish your point. Go ahead.
So what does the average person do? Like, as far as, do they reach out? Does someone reach out to them? Or do they keep going the same cycle, spin cycle?
At minimum, I would try to educate yourself in that, whether that be through, any financial website, Nerd Wallet, or, stuff along those lines. Get yourself familiar with common terms, financial terms, and how that impacts you. And then that's where, if you feel more deeply that you can better yourself with outside sources, that's whenever you would go to a wealth advisor, wealth manager, those sort of things.
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. The firm I work for has a $60 billion commitment over the next 10 years to serve underprivileged communities and provide financial literacy. In fact, we actually have hired what we call community managers, and there's 4 of them in Dallas-Fort Worth, all over the country, that go into underserved communities and have workshops at our local branches that are in the communities. That, by the way, unlike you heard the term food desert, right? Well, there's a term banking desert out there as well, where parts of the community don't have banks, frankly, because it's the firm has deemed it too dangerous to have a bank there based on risk, which is unfortunate. However, it's a really important distinction that's absolutely been the historical norm, that we're definitely not teaching it in school, and hopefully that's been changing. But personally myself, I've done multiple different workshops, whether it be at church or whether it be corporately with my firm, to help educate folks. But you make an excellent point. I used to work at Fidelity. They have a great learning center, and going online and learning the basics is huge, in my opinion.
But you just got to get people to do it, and I think a lot of people, you start talking anything financial to them, their eyes roll back in their head, and that's a challenge.
I mean, part of it is too, without getting too, I don't know, philosophical or whatever, it's human nature. I mean, we all know the right things to do to not be overweight. Drink more water, eat healthy stuff, well, all the things, exercise, whatever. But there's a large percent of America that is obese, right? And it's not because they want to be, it's because they just choose every day not to make the right choices, right? And I think now that most of our financial things that we do, it's all digital. You click a button on Amazon, you don't even have to put your card in anymore. You just tap it on top of the machine, I remember when my children were small and my son I said something about buying something. I was like, I said something about not wanting to spend the money on it. He goes, well, just use that card. Like they don't understand the connection between the card and the money. So I think finances has almost become, it's a human nature thing. It doesn't matter that I have $25,000 in credit card debt and $350 in my bank account and rent's due next week. I want that coffee from Starbucks. I'm going to buy it anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's.
But see, doesn't that go back to some of the conversation when you start looking at who's responsible for the teaching of that? Where did you learn it, right?
Well,
Think about that.
But you know what?
Why are we expecting?
There are days I shouldn't be buying Starbucks either. I'm a giant hypocrite right now saying all that out loud. It's like I make bad choices. We all make bad choices, right? We all spend money we shouldn't. But that's a great point. I don't want to push. We found a Dave Ramsey book when we were in our early 20s, and that changed the way we looked at money. It changed the way we spent money. Our financial education was self-taught to a certain extent because we happened upon a book that changed everything for us.
And that's remarkable. And back to Roderick's point, you know, why isn't that principle? Because that's not like a brain surgery principle. The Dave Ramsey principle is,
No.
is very
And
simple to
quite-
understand. So why isn't that
Quite
taught?
frankly, 20 years
school?
later, I don't buy into every single thing he says, especially as a realtor. One of his big things is you should have 20% down before you buy a house. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. So there are certain things that he does preach that I don't agree with, but the basics of how you get out of debt, I mean, are pretty.
Robert, you asked what the typical household should do, correct? Stephanie brought up how easy it is to go on Amazon. I think it's just as easy now to go to your spend analyzer, discovers the chases of the world, do all the work for you. You go on their spend analyzer and see exactly where your costs are going. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? So you could either benefit you or it could hurt you. So do that along with personal financial statements out there, on the SBA website, fill one of those out, because you don't recognize, if you don't work with assets and liabilities all day, you don't recognize what is considered an asset, and then dig into that asset where you sit, along with even more so dig into your liabilities. So
And I'm going to amen that to the fifth power, because we have never had access to information like we do today. And so you know what? Where is the personal accountability in your own self to want to? You're not going to solve someone's problem who doesn't want it solved.
That's right.
Because if you got a problem and you want it solved, you can go look up anything. You have access to everything. There are all kinds of tools out there. So it goes back to the individual and what their desire level is. If you don't have the desire for it, it doesn't matter. They're
That's the
not
thing.
going to talk to you and they're not going to search it out.
I
Right.
mean, if you ask, we mentioned weight, if you gave a truth pill to 1,000 folks who are obese and you say, how often do you get on the scale? They're going to say probably not that often. Now, if they're on a weight loss journey, maybe. So my point is I'm paralleling that back to downloading the Every Dollar app or going on a spend analyzer website. That's getting on the scale,
Right.
right? They know they're overweight. They know they have a negative net worth.
Right.
But how do we actually start analyzing that? We start tracking calories, or you start working out, or you start getting, whatever. Financially, to get financially fit is a painful realization that people have to make changes and sacrifices, just like losing weight. You have to make changes and sacrifices. And so Lori hit the nail on the head. It's a personal decision, but to what you mentioned earlier, I think it's too important of a topic. I mean, we've been pushing healthy lunches for 20 years at this point, right? Maybe longer in schools. I think it's too important of a topic to ignore in our primary school system. And I'll leave us with that, but we can't continue to ignore it.
So at what point I was been thinking about the people, like I said, they just do what they want and they've got to really feel the pain. And is it too late? That all this $1 trillion in credit card debt can be defaulted, more bankruptcies, things like that, we'll probably see that, I would think. But then again, let's just talk in that people are having to, maybe they're starting to feel the pain. It's almost like we need this every once in a while.
It's the only time, going back to the whole it is human nature. The only time anybody's gonna, if they haven't already elected, if they don't have it internally already, so you have to hit rock bottom and then you have to go, oh crap, now what am I gonna do and how do I get out? Or maybe I just love it down here and I'm gonna wallow in it.
People will do much more to avoid pain than they will to gain pleasure. So
So-
it's not until it hurts badly enough that they will start to make
Very good
changes.
point.
But I think what Stephanie was saying about just tap the credit card, it's out of sight, out of mind for 30 days a month or 29 days a month. And one day a month, it hurts when you see that credit card bill.
Yeah, but that's automatic too. Most
That does
people,
come out.
not most people, a lot of people set up automatic payments and then all of a sudden they go, oh my gosh, I'm negative in my bank account, the actual money that I have, well, the digital money that I have. I'm like, what happened? Like your credit card bill hit, sweetheart. Like, that's what happened.
Or, I mean, it's not even just credit cards, right? It's all of the streaming services now that do automatic drafts. And I mean, everything does an automatic draft. And before you know it, it's out of control. And you don't even know what's coming out of your account anymore because you done forgot about that thing you subscribed to 6 months ago. So, yeah.
Yep.
Uh-oh.
Well,
It's all about choice. That's
Yes.
the
Well,
freedom we have.
I want to go back to your question about personal accountability, because that is, in the long run, I think that's the most interesting piece of it is, I'm married to someone who hates debt. Like he can't sleep at night knowing that he owes anybody anything. Like it is in his psyche. He does not like to owe anybody anything. But we sell houses to people all the time that, we know how much debt they have because we have to know and I'm like, how do they sleep at night? You know what I mean? Like you just know that like people all over the place are extending themselves, right? But what is the accountability? There isn't really any.
They sleep just fine on that new
They-
Tempur-Pedic that they bought the rodeo.
That's right.
On 0%
That's
for
right.
24 months,
That's
and then
right.
blue game and
That's right. After they got out of the hot tub that they also bought.
That's right.
Right?
Stop, baby.
I mean, so.
That's not true.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, they're really, to your point, if they don't want to change or don't, I mean,
They're not going to.
there is no accountability. At some point, I guess the credit runs out, like you can't get
Yeah.
approved for more.
Or your house of cards, your own personal house of cards, prayers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's,
sad.
And I think it's a good point. Like when it gets to that pain point where it's all right, I need some help. Let me go and reach out and come see you or come, talk to someone for buying a house or financial. I think that's when that mindset is when it kicks in. Because like at the beginning of the year, everyone has their resolution. I'm gonna lose weight. I'm gonna save money. I'm gonna budget. Normally around February, March is when they start those who don't have that mindset, that definite cheap anyway, they start falling off. So
And frankly, one thing you mentioned just sparked the thought that the finance industry needs to do better at. As you mentioned, when they start, getting down to debt, then they go to a financial advisor potentially. What's the difference in a financial advisor and a debt consolidator that's going to potentially be predatory? Because financial advisors help clients with assets typically. It's how the business works, unfortunately. So we, as an industry, need to do better at education on the front end. Because if someone comes in and says, "Hey, help me get out of debt," and I'm go, "Great, what's your 401k look like?" And they go, "What's a 401k?" And I go, "Okay, this is awkward." But that's just how we're compensated. It's how
That's right.
the industry works. So
That's right.
we need to take a step back. And again, that's why I think financial literacy has been so passionate to me. Starting with clients, children, 17, 20, 22, helping them with 401ks, but coming up on time. But an interesting mindset that I heard from a mentor of mine was a poor man's mentality saves. And he said that, and I kind of cocked my head to the side. And a wealth mentality invests. So, the stock market obviously is not for everybody, but investing in something, whether it's real estate or Bitcoin. No, I'm kidding. Investing in something, I think is worth considering. So there you go.
Investing in something you understand.
Yeah, or hire someone that can understand it for you. If you're able to do that. 401ks are a great way to start.
All right, so that concludes today. Next month, we are talking, I believe, insurance, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll be our topic next month. And, all right.